Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Marley is a Montessori trained teacher who specializes in working with children between the ages of birth and 3 years old. She's also a certified pediatric sleep consultant, parent coach, and a full-time mom. She loves working with families of young children as they navigate sleep, toilet learning, and the toddler years. It's her belief that toddlers are capable, joyous, funny, and helpful little beings if given an environment in which to flourish. I'm so excited to have you with me today, Marley. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
We were just kind of chatting before I hit record here a little bit about, the different topics that we were thinking about tackling, and one of them being, infant, toddler, just like childhood sleep while you're in like small, unique, like living situations. And that's something that I've been tackling and noticing a lot recently with both postpartum and sleep clients. I've had a handful of clients that have had their kiddos in the same room as them for a longer period of time. Whereas I feel like I was used to seeing, a lot of families moving their kiddos out at, the 6-month mark or a year mark. And I'm same thing with sleep clients, right? I'm finding a lot of people in apartments and buildings that have shared walls, and so they're nervous about sleep training due to their neighbors. And it's probably the economy keeping people from buying houses, right? Or like whatever it may be. But I'm excited to like chat with you about it because I know that you have some unique, situations of your own that you can kind of share with too.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll jump right in. So our living situation is very unique. We live in Fairbanks, Alaska, and we're in a 1-room dry cabin, which means we don't have running water. And it's 1 room with a loft. So from the very beginning, when I first got pregnant, I was like, I have to figure out sleep because if we're in 1 room with a loft, that means there are no doors to close. And so if my husband and I want to have a life in the evening or after our child sleeps, then we need to figure out sleep so that we're not like going in and, helping him fall asleep until midnight and then having no evening to ourselves. Or, just, we need to figure this out because he also needs to find quality sleep in one space. And like, if we're doing dishes or if we're doing, and I say doing dishes, but we have a foot pump and a water jug. It's not like we don't have plumbing. But if we're like cleaning up from the evening or just like doing things and living
anything
life,
that makes sound, right?
Yeah.
Having a conversation.
So that was like my number 1 priority when we had our son. And I've learned a lot since then. I'm in becoming a sleep trainer and just, like going through life and figuring it out as we go. But I've been really happy with how it's worked out. And I think my biggest thing was that I kind of thought as a Montessori educator, I was like, okay, at a certain point, I want my son to have his own sleep space. I want him to have his own independent little sleep space where he can like find his clothes and have his stuff accessible, at his height and all this stuff. And the reality is that he is now 2. He turned 2 in May, and he's still in our loft with us, which was not the plan. Like I was like, oh, we'll have a different place, and he'll have his own room by the time he's 2 for sure. And that's not the case. So I've been really, really happy with how it's turned out. And I've just come to learn that like you can still co-sleep in a room or in a space and they can still learn independent sleep skills and still have a really healthy and positive relationship with sleep. Um, and I think one of the biggest bonuses is that like we travel around quite a bit. And if we have to share a room somewhere, like on travels, it's fine because like
Right.
this is our jam. Or if like we make noise or whatever while traveling, like if he's in a new environment and he's not in his like little sleep corner, he can sleep well because he's used to hearing the sounds of life
Right.
around him.
Right.
And so yeah, I have lots of thoughts on all that,
I
but
love
that's
it.
kind of like the gist.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so important to remember because so many people come to me for sleep support and they're like, yeah, well, my 8-month-old or whatever, and I still want to keep them in my room though. Can we still do that? Or like, I feel like so many people reach out and they're like, oh, I just want to connect to you to have you in my back pocket for when I'm ready to move my kid out of the room. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
did you know you can do it while they're still in the room, right? Like, yes, there are some things that may be more difficult in doing that, right? And there may be some different learning curves and different ways to approach sleep training or to approach like sleep as a whole with a little one when you're talking about a shared space. But I think that at the same time, like you said, once you can figure it out, like they sleep through everything, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure that you're saying like you're in, this one room and the loft. And so I can only imagine also with a loft, I think, light and bright too, right? I'm sure there are like different
Yeah.
spaces and
And
like you can only block out so much light and so much noise, right? So you really kind of had to get him shaped to be used to all these things.
well, I will say that our biggest friend is blackout curtains, where
Ah,
we are, because in Alaska too, half the year you have extra daylight. And
I was gonna
so in the
ask about
summer
that
months, yeah.
too.
So there's like 3 months where it is light out for more than, I want to say, like 15 hours or something. Like it's crazy. So we've had to get very creative with blackout curtains to block off our loft. And um, I will say that like clients ask me all the time, do you need blackout curtains? Do you need a sound machine? And I'm sure you've talked a lot about this with other podcast guests, but I look at them as tools, right?
Right,
So they're tools to have. And I think if you have a solid foundation with sleep skills, then your child does not need to rely on those things as
right,
supports as much, but they're great to have in your back pocket, especially for travel. But in our case, blackout curtains are kind of necessary for at least half
right.
the
It's a
year.
different
And
life.
my husband and I also like we've trained ourselves where not trained ourselves, but like we like sleeping in a dark space because we just get better quality sleep.
Right.
And I think my son does too, but honestly, at this point, I'm like, he's got such a great
He's used to
foundation
it.
that
Yeah.
he's used to like, yeah, and he can nap like here now. We're traveling a little bit and visiting my parents right now, but on the East Coast, like we don't have a situation where we can make it completely blacked out. And so I've just noticed like it's not a big deal. He's fine. And if you get it dark enough, like he's tired enough and he'll sleep. Um, but anyway, yeah, we've had to get creative with our living space back home. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun to figure out like what challenges do pop up now that he's in one room.
Hmm.
And I would say that the hardest thing is like recently between 20-24 months, the getting out of bed, because he's also in a little
Mm.
floor bed because we don't
Okay.
have a lot of space. So he yeah, he started off in a guava travel crib, which was like a mattress on the floor, but it's meshed in. I don't know if you've ever seen them with like
Yeah.
a side zip. And that was amazing because he would travel everywhere with his bed too. So like if we went somewhere, I mean,
Makes
he
it
had his
easy for
bed.
that. Yeah.
Makes it easy. And I was a little hesitant to transition to a different situation because in the loft too, you have to think of like the ladder and the the railing. And we have all that blocked off pretty well. But yeah, we transitioned him to a little floor mattress in a corner, and it's worked so well. I mean, it's just become his little nook. And again, it's like
Oh,
routine and consistency. You know, we've kept everything kind of the same, but yeah, he's got his own little nook and he loves it.
I love that. I love that. Now, would you share with families like a little bit about, or would you share with listeners, I suppose, a little bit about, how you got to that point, right? So you said you had been in that space since he came into the world, right?
Yeah, yep.
So how did that
Yeah,
work?
so
Like getting him into like a good routine in there and how was it a struggle as a newborn? Because oftentimes newborns do need like that dark and quiet kind of space sometimes, or was it pretty easy to get him accustomed to it?
I would say I had so many ideas of what infancy and postpartum would be like
Yep.
because of just again my Montessori background,
Right.
working with birth to three, and nothing was as I had expected. Right? I mean, I think that's the case all the time, but I had to really let go of a lot with postpartum. It was a challenging time because I never pictured myself having a kid and going through postpartum in a dry cabin in the middle of the woods in Alaska. So, yeah, I had to let go of a lot. And what I've realized is that kids are way more adaptable than we give them credit for, even newborns. And
Absolutely.
I would say that the transition for him was not as challenging as one might think. Like, it was actually quite easy to keep our cabin really like they say the fourth trimester, right? You want to keep everything kind of womb like or just warm and dim and cozy, and I feel like our cabin actually allowed us to do that quite well. He was born in May, so yes, the light was bright, but we were able to like again get creative with blackout curtains or just yeah, I don't know. It's all a blur too. I don't
I
remember much
know.
from that
I know.
time. But yeah, I would say when they're infants and they're sleeping so deeply, you actually like you want them to kind of hear all those environmental sounds, right? You
Hmm.
don't want to create like a perfectly quiet environment because they need to hear those points of reference from in utero, which is just the sounds of your daily life. So I felt like that was like very easy to do to
Right.
accomplish because he's hearing all that anyway, just being in one room. But yeah, and I think like there was just so many like contact naps and snuggles and like I just don't remember. I remember that time being harder for me, to be honest. Like he did not struggle so much with adapting to that unique living situation. It was more
Right.
me
Yeah. Right. Well, and it's
adapting to
it's that idea
postpartum.
of like knowing like you're dealing with the postpartum, you're trying to help this new human now, right? Like your whole life has pivoted from being like you and your partner being, priorities to now a child being priorities. And I talk with that all the time, right? Like your priorities get all flipped up. And
Yeah,
putting things in different orders and you're learning new life and all this jazz. But then yeah, like I feel like the kiddos are like, oh, okay, cool. Like,
yeah, along
sometimes
for
you
the
have
ride.
a fussy kiddo, or you might have a kiddo that needs something and has, high needs in a certain area. But I think overall, like you said, babies are so resilient, babies are so flexible. They like definitely are more, yeah, they're more adaptable than you think, I think, than people
Yeah, and
think
I
they
think
are.
for me it was a really good learning just time because you know again I was so in this mindset of like okay, I have all this training, which is like a bonus and a curse almost,
Right.
right? Because I've worked with toddlers. I have this extensive training on like child development. So like this has to be in place and we need to do these things this way and all this. And
Mm-hmm.
like the reality is it all goes out the door when you have this little child in front of you and you're like, okay, now I just have to survive and like live life.
Yeah.
And that it was just I don't know if I would have had that stark of a learning moment, like had I not been in that difficult of a uh, situation in terms of, or just like
Absolutely.
as different as a situation. Um, but anyway, yeah. So I think that with sleep as a newborn, like in that space, it was a beautiful time. I now looking back am like so grateful that we've had this one room experience because I it's just a small space. Like it seems stressful to our adult brains, but I think for children, looking at it from a point of like attachment and connection, it's such a beautiful thing. It can be, because
Yeah.
you have this small living space where you can still have separate spaces for doing like whatever, the kitchen or a kid's little play area or whatever, but they can kind of always see and hear you. So
Yep.
like, even if they're in a different part of the space, they feel connected to you and they don't have to go far to look for you. And you also can kind of trust them a little bit more to be like, okay, I see you right there on the floor, like doing some tummy time, but I'm going to just like come over here and start prepping dinner or something. So
Yeah.
again, our situation is different because it was one room. So
Mm-hmm.
I could literally see any point around
Right.
me. But I think the same holds true for a small apartment. Because if you're in that living space and you want to go do something and your infant is on the floor happily playing or whatever, like you can give them a little bit of space and also still be right there and they can see and hear you. And I just think that it has created a really cool relationship for us.
100%.
Yeah.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And I think that that is a big stressor for families when they bring babies home is like, okay, like if I do put them down, like how can I go to the bathroom or how can I start dinner? And so I think that
Yeah.
having a smaller space, there are pros to it in that way, where you are close to like little one and you can see them often,
Yeah.
which can be a total game changer for some of that. Now, as he got a little bit older, right? Or like we're using you as an example and your kiddo as an example, obviously, but this kind of goes for like, I'm sure clients that you support when it comes to sleep as well. But is there, as we get into more like toddlerhood type things, and age brackets, are there things that you had to change or do differently and adapt to make it more, uh, I guess age appropriate would be the word?
Yeah, for sure. I think that the biggest thing is kind of like setting some boundaries. That was the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing as he aged, got older, and just um, like with the in and out of bed and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But I think that, like, I'm trying to think for over the whole course of time, I mean, you can keep your bedtime routine, your sleep routine pretty consistent. So
right,
even though in the beginning it looked more like a little baby massage and like nursing him and reading some books and then putting him down, that the components kind of evolved as he got older, but the whole flow of the routine stayed the same. And
yep,
so it kind of evolved into like, a feeding earlier in the routine and then some books and some wind down time and pajamas and like into bed. And now it's very much like I'm trying to let him do so much more. And so that's where the time component comes in to the
right,
routine, like giving it 30-35 minutes. But it's very simple in that it's like, we read books and we get into our pajamas and we go to the bathroom and sit on the potty and then, into bed, sing a song into bed. So it has changed. The components have changed,
mm-hmm.
but for the most part, the flow has stayed the same. And I think that that is something that a lot of people worry about. They kind of think, okay, my kid is now in a different developmental stage. So what does bedtime look like? And I just feel like it doesn't have to change that drastically.
Right,
Um, like obviously you're gonna do some things a little bit different, especially with the feeding, as that changes over time. But for the most part, the flow kind of stays the same. Um, but yeah, I think setting boundaries is really the hardest thing, and we see that even at an infant
right,
stage where sleep is really one of the first things I think that parents have to um, set a boundary around. Like it's like the first element of parenting, like
yeah,
real hard parenting that we have to do, because up until that point we're just feeding them and playing with them and it's
right.
like for the most part fun and great. um, and then sleep when we want to, like around that 3-4 months when things start to change and we want to maybe establish a little routine around it. It just it becomes one of the hardest, like one of the first hard things we have to do.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that changes. It kind of remains challenging. It
Yeah.
can, but it's how you approach it. And I think it's totally a little bit of your mindset too. But yeah, I would say that the setting boundaries part is really hard. And it's beautiful. Like, you have to be comfortable doing it. And I guess when I say setting boundaries, just like trusting yourself and trusting your kid that um, that they can get to the other side of this, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
so if you're
That they're
having a
capable
challenging
of it,
moment,
right?
yeah, that they're capable of it. And like even last night, just for example, my son is a pretty good sleeper, but at bedtime he was like crying so much beside himself. And I laid with him a little bit extra. And then finally I was at a point where I was like, I've met all his needs. He's not communicating with me like what he needs. I think he's just a little overtired and just needs to go to bed. And so it was finally just like a moment of, okay, I have to pull myself away.
Right.
I have to make this decision. And within like 5, 6 minutes, I mean, he had settled down after I left. But yeah, I just feel like those moments of like, how do I put this into words?
No, you're good.
Yeah, just
Well, I think it is, right? It's knowing that they're capable. It's also like setting boundaries and like children test boundaries. That's part of like their development, right? So like for them to know where like lines are
for sure.
drawn is so healthy and so beneficial to them too, because then they know, okay, like if I like this is a hard boundary that like, yeah, mom might sit with me for a few extra minutes, but like she's not going to sit with me till I fall asleep, right? And like that's something that they learn or they know, right? And I think that that kind of is, I think you hit the nail on the head with this is like the first time you have to truly set a boundary. And it's also so hard when it comes to sleep too, because a lot of the times, like you said, like they're overtired or they just need to go to sleep. And so you want to help them get
Yeah,
there. But like at the same time, have to trust that like they're capable. I talk to my clients a lot about like consistency and confidence, right? Like you have to be confident in your kiddo and you also have to be confident in the choice that you're making for your family and like the choice that you're making for what you think is best for your kiddo, because otherwise like they're gonna sniff it out a mile away that something's up, right? Like they're gonna know that you're
totally.
faking
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And if you're like indecisive about it too, I mean, I think that they just
Yeah,
mirror all of that and they totally pick up on it.
absolutely.
But yeah, I think that those setting boundaries is one of the most challenging parts as they age, because sleep looks like it just the challenges that a toddler or a child will like throw at you changes as they get older,
Absolutely.
right? And so you have this like happy little toddling 12-month old who's like happy to go about their routine, and then they enter that age of opposition around like 18 months or so, and it's like everything changes.
Right.
So you just have to kind of be resilient. And um yeah, I think it's very much a mindset game sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I think boundaries plays really right into like my next question that I was going to get your input on, which is like those nighttime stuff. So like obviously, every family is going to choose to night wean at a different time or choose to like not be getting up with their kiddo in the middle of the night. And everybody does all different things in the middle of the night when their kiddo wakes up. But I know for a lot of the families that reach out to me that are sharing a room or a space are often coming to me saying like, yeah, my kiddo falls asleep in their own space, but then like the middle of the night they wake up and they know I'm there, so they end up just coming in bed with me. And I think that's the part
Yeah.
that families have such a hard time staying consistent with because it's the middle of the night, because they are in the same room, and I think that that boundary is often really hard for people to kind of like put down and hold to. So do you have any like tips and tricks that you did or that you do with families when they are in the same space? And do you have anything like obviously every type of like sleep training is going to be different and how you approach night wakings is going to be different, but are there any things that you do to kind of make those night wakings less or easier in any way?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would say about like making a space, if you're sharing a space, is trying to make a part of that space very much your child's.
Hmm.
Because in our lofted space, even though it is a shared space, like he has a little corner that's kind of become his space. And I feel like giving them a little bit of control over that space, or just giving them a little bit of like autonomy in the space, is
Yeah.
really important, because they feel like I'm not just sleeping on a separate mattress like in my parents' room. Like this is our space. And so this is my sleep
Yep.
space, and then this is your sleep space. And
Right.
everyone can do it differently. It can look different. Like in the mornings when he wakes up, he does come into our bed and snuggles for like 20 minutes before we all get up. And that's just something that works for us. But
Right.
I've been really um I've been really just like, yeah, focused on creating a space for him. And so it's like he's got a little dresser, he has a little mirror, his potty, his mattress, and just trying to show him that like this is where he sleeps and this is where we sleep. And having
Yep.
a lot of conversations around that. I think the older a child gets, communication is like your biggest tool. And oftentimes, especially when it's your first kid, I think oftentimes we forget how much that they are capable
I
of
was just gonna
understanding.
say that.
Yeah, because like even if they're not expressing verbal language, they are taking it all in, and they are
100%.
so cognizant of what is going on around them. So I think communication is key, and especially with those nighttime wakings, like having a conversation, ideally at a neutral time, like the next day or something, and just explaining like in the middle of the night when you wake up, you know, you can call out for mommy, or you can hug your teddy bear really tight. You know, giving them some tools that they can do when they do wake up. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it is challenging. Like one of the benefits of sharing a space is that you're right there, right? So
Right.
like if there is a 3 a.m. wake up, you're not walking far to deal with it. You're kind of like rolling out of bed and going over to
Mm-hmm.
see what's up. But the other thing is that like, yeah, you often can't just roll over and give them like 5 minutes to see if
Yeah.
they'll figure it out, because it's now affecting everyone's sleep.
Right.
And I would imagine in a small apartment, this is so much harder. But yeah, I definitely tell my clients to like try to be as consistent as possible, because it is so easy when you're sharing a space to like fall back on old habits right away,
Absolutely.
because you're like, oh well, we all want sleep, we're all in this space, like
What's the
this is just
difference?
what's,
Right.
yeah, like. But I think that like you were saying earlier on, like it is so possible to have healthy sleep habits in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can sleep train an infant or a toddler in that space and all successfully sleep.
Right.
Um, but I think that, yeah, communication is key, and like role playing is really, really helpful. Um, and like if that's the limit that you want to set, and saying that like this is mommy and daddy's bed and this is your bed, I don't see anything wrong with that. Like
Right.
that is the line that's drawn, right? Like
Exactly. You have to
they're
find what
coming
line's
into,
comfortable for you, right?
right.
And hold to.
And I've met people who are like, I just want to work on bedtime. And like, as long as bedtime in the first half of the night is okay, like, I don't really care what happens after 4 a.m.
Exactly.
And like, that's great. If that works for you, that's fine. But yeah, I think that creating their own space, and also like spending time in that room other parts of the day, and not
Yes.
just having it be like sleep heavy, you know, like so sleep focused. Um, and I think that that's easier said than done, say in our space, than like in an apartment where it is just a bedroom. But, you know, having your kid in there when you're folding laundry, or
Yeah.
having them help you change the sheets, or like different things like that, just including them in more activities in that room than just sleep, I
Absolutely.
think are helpful.
Yeah, I say the
I
same
don't know if
thing
that
with
answered your
especially
question.
infants too. No, you totally did. I think I say a lot with infants too when I talk to like postpartum clients and they're like, oh, I'm starting to think about having my kiddo in like in their own space, or, you know, the baby every time they wake up every 30 minutes and they just want to be held and rocked back to sleep. And I think that's one of the things that's tricky with one, putting kids to sleep in their own space asleep, right? Like they don't know where they're going to sleep. And then
Yeah.
also for kiddos that are getting up in the middle of the night and wanting like to stay with you, if you're not wanting that to happen, right? I think a big important part is, yeah, like let them hang out in that space and like get comfortable with it. And like you said, like that autonomy of like, this is my space, that's really important to get. And that's not going to happen while they're sleeping, right?
Yeah.
So getting them used to like owning their space while they're awake. I tell people to put like their babies in the crib while they're putting the baby's laundry away or doing like something, or if they have to run to the bathroom, because them looking around and being like, oh yeah, this is where I sleep. This is my space. This is cool during the daylight is
Yeah.
a way for them to get used to it, right?
Yeah, and I think that on the flip side of that, you don't want to do it too much where they're
Right.
like constantly in there and like especially putting them in and like, whatever. But I do think that having it be like less stressful of like, okay, it's sleep time and like now we're going to the bedroom and this is where we sleep, and just making it more a part of like everyday life, and like this
Yeah,
is just a room in the house and here's what happens in it, and like come up and help me, put my laundry away or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know, I think just making it more a part of like their everyday life instead of just bedtime is
absolutely.
helpful.
I love
But
that
you
point.
just touched on something that I did want to say. I think sharing a space is also really helpful for those moments if you are practicing any elements of sleep training and you want to practice giving your child a little bit of space. I actually think that sharing that room is like, it can be really helpful because you're, say, lying in bed and it's 2 a.m. and your child wakes up, and if you're practicing on giving them a little bit of time, um, and working towards like consolidating that night's sleep, being in that space, I think can really help you like listen to their cries and you can be there with them knowing like they're safe,
Yeah,
they're in their space. Let me just see like how much time I can give them, kind of thing.
right.
And for me, I felt like that was a huge help because I
Hmm.
wasn't anxious about like, oh my gosh, if I have to like go down the hall and then, you know, if he doesn't need my help and then I'm disrupting him and then, my sleep's disrupted because I'm out of
Right.
bed. But in the same room, it was like, okay, I'm just going to give him like 5 minutes. Let's see what happens. And then if
Hmm.
he still needs me, like, of course, I'm up and I'm by the bed and,
Right.
we're going through our routine or whatever. But it was just really helpful for me to be able to kind of be in the same space and be like, okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And it just felt more manageable because there weren't, yeah, I don't know. I wasn't walking all
Well,
over the
I
house.
think
So,
yeah, I think for a lot of anxious parents, the idea of like sleep training is associated with this idea that we know of like cry it out, which means that you're not there
right.
for your child and it feels like you're not comforting your child. But I think there's so much more that you can do to comfort your child than just to be like physically holding them, touching them, right? Like if your kiddo is smart enough to know that when they wake up, if they call out, they know you're there. They're also smart enough to know that like, oh, I wake up and my parents there, I'm safe, I can go back to sleep. And so similarly for parents, right? You know, your kiddo wakes up, like you said, and they're down the hall. You're probably like, oh, they probably feel alone. They probably don't feel like I'm here. But if you're in the same room as them, you're able to rationalize that anxiety a little bit and be like, okay,
Yeah, for sure.
they know I'm here. I know they're there. We both know that everything's okay, everything's safe. Like, let's give them, like you said, some space to try to see if they want to figure it out, if that's something that people are comfortable with doing. And then being like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I can go step in and help out now. And I think that's such a huge point that you made.
Yeah. I felt like it was a lot easier on my anxiety. And just, yeah, just like feeling like, okay, I'm here, he's safe. It reduces a lot of the mental load, I think.
100%. That's
Sometimes.
awesome.
Yeah.
Are there any other tips and tricks that you want to give people that are listening that may be in a small space or a shared space when it comes to sleep, or anything that you like wish you knew before, you kind of went down this path of being in a small space with a kiddo?
Well, I wish I knew that this was going to be the case until 2 years old, because, but no, I'm really happy that we've kept this going till two. I do feel like he's reaching an age where, uh, his own space would be beneficial,
Yeah,
just because like toddlers have such big energy, right? And so
right.
it's like hard to contain that all into one space. But No, I think any other tips and tricks, I would say that um, finding like a crib can take up a lot of space, and that was our concern. And so the guava travel crib really worked well for us because it was a little bit more compact, but it's like a pack and play. But I think, yeah, again, like making it their own space, even as an infant, like figuring out a way to kind of have their stuff in one corner, and yeah, I guess not getting caught up too much in like all the material aspects of
Right.
this stuff, like of child stuff in your room, because like in a small space you have to be really picky about what you keep
Yeah.
and about what's there. And I think just realizing that like kids, I mean, everyone says this, but it's so true, kids really don't need a lot of stuff. And so
Right.
it's more the like human environment around them that's important, and just like the non-tangible elements. And I think the same
100%.
goes for sleep. Like there's some things that are necessary, like, you know, a sleep sack, or I don't know, different elements that work for you with sleep. But yeah, it's more about like setting those boundaries again, and that routine that kind of locks things into place.
Absolutely. Yeah, the
Yeah,
minimalism. I love it.
the
I love it.
minimalism was kind of
Yeah. No, that's so
yeah,
true. I think that in a world of social media, it's so easy and quick to be able to like jump on and be like, oh my gosh, this person has that. Oh, I'm depriving my child because I don't have this or I don't have that. But I think just remembering that,
yeah.
like, yeah, you're working with what you've got and you're living your best life, and your child doesn't know any different.
Yeah, and I think that was like going back to kind of what we were saying just about that small space, and how the child, I think there's just this beautiful bond that happens in
Yeah.
a small space, because they know that you're close, and so they feel like, yeah, I think that that's really the most important thing, right? Is like
Yeah.
you are really the most important thing, and the most important toy
Right.
in the first few years of life. Like, you know, different
Absolutely.
things keep them occupied for sure, but I think it's you that, and so wherever you guys are, that's kind of, yeah,
I love that. I love
that's
it.
home.
Ah, it's
That's
so
home.
true. It's
Whether it's a
perfect.
small space or a big house, it can work either way.
Absolutely. I love it. Thank you so much for tackling the topic and for sharing your like personal and like professional expertise on it. I
Yeah, of
appreciate
course.
it, and
Thanks for
we'll
having me.
hopefully have you back soon.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks. Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.